On the aft deck, a helmsman known as the weathercock droned a tune into his ale-horn. He was a rotund, bald man with a doughy face and wiry beard that he plucked while singing. When the lads approached, the listeners welcomed them warmly, but the weathercock was not pleased with the interruption. "There may never be a right time for such hindrances," he grumbled. "Which one of you needs me?" The wave receded, leaving the sword-bearer stuck before the helmsman. He saluted and spoke. "I came to tell you that when you go to the Cape tomorrow, you should wear your war clothes. I saw a Skraeling while ashore, and I think he has called his people to arms." "What?" cried the men in unison, leaning forward to hear. Only the weathercock remained squinting, attempting to focus. "What kind of prank is this?" he eventually sneered. Alrek drew a stone hatchet from his belt. "This is one proof that it's no prank," he said. The men made exclamations and reached out for the hatchet, but old Grimkel leaned forward and fixed his eye on the sword-bearer. "How did you get it?" he demanded. "You didn't forget?" A rueful smile curved on the boy's lips as he met Grimkel's gaze. "I remembered," he said slowly, "until I saw the Skraeling. Then I forgot." "You attacked him." The weathercock's face reddened like a volcano. Alrek looked at him with brown eyes. "You are a good guesser," he replied politely. From all directions, exclamations of concern rose, but the weathercock seemed enraged. His face erupted like a volcano. You good-for-nothing wolf's whelp gone mad," he sputtered. "What do you mean by standing there so quietly when your mad-dog temper has brought discredit upon my leadership, which would otherwise have gained me great fame with the lawmen? One thing after another, worse and worse, will be caused by this. The Skraelings may be surrounding us, even as we speak, and we shall be forced to share your disobedience or else get killed. Or it may be both fight and get killed, since when Karlsefne finds how his orders have been regarded. But the first result of this will be that we will not go ashore tomorrow nor any other time. Allez, fast, Hjalmar, up with the anchor and out with the sail." As cries of protest arose, he beat them down with his short, fat arms. "You shall not set foot upon land, you pack of ravening curs. Not until you get to camp, and then I hope you will have reason to wish. Ah, to think that when we get to camp I must tell this instead of the report I had expected to give." He struck his fists together until it seemed as if he might forget the sword-bearer's free birth and lay them on him in blows. "Why did I not remember that you had outlaw blood under your fair speaking and keep you under my heel? But you shall pay for your liberty now. You shall be tied with walrus thongs and thrown into the foreroom and kept there without food or drink until we reach Vinland. Take him hence, do you hear my words? Lodin, Grimkel." He broke off to tug at his belt, which unwanted exertion was rendering distressingly snug, and in the interval the protests of the young Greenlanders burst forth anew, expressing unreservedly what they thought of him for taking away their chance of going ashore. When he turned on them, his thick neck rumbling volcano-like, they even gave back curse for curse, until, what with their racket and his bawling and the running to and fro of the sailors, the afterdeck of the Wind Raven presented a lively appearance. The only quiet person on it was the culprit. Saluting with ironical ceremony, he yielded to the touch of Grimkel's hand upon his shoulder, and they proceeded to the little room under the foredeck, which served on extraordinary occasions for a dungeon, and on ordinary ones as a storeroom for bales of fur and ale casks and kegs of salted fish. Alrek grimaced as they entered. "If I could learn to feed my stomach through my nose, I should not starve however long I stayed here," he remarked. The hand on his shoulder shook him roughly. "You deserve to starve," the elder snapped. "I have the heart to pound you, after I had warned you how the lawman is holding you in the balance." He jammed his torch into its bracket and kicked a barrel out of his way. Moved by the elder's heat, Alrek tried to appear nonchalant as he held out his wrists for the rope. He retorted that if Karlsefne had been watching him for 2 years, it was time he found out something. Grimkel growled as he worked at the knots. "You will find out something when you come before him," he barked. "Have you got it in your mind that you have prevented him from fulfilling what lies nearest his heart? He counted on strengthening the settlement by making friends with the Skraelings, and planned to get knowledge from their experience of the country, and riches by trading with them. And he has condemned Thorwald's short-sightedness in attacking them, and commanded how they should be received with gifts and fair words. It is impossible that the fates will allow a wise man to be balked by a boy's folly." Alrek suggested, "If it is impossible, why do you trouble yourself over it?" He went on to ask that the hatchet be carefully kept for him. Grimkel stiffened in silence as he bent over to fasten the ankle bonds. But before he could respond in anger, a thrilling voice called out to Windraven, summoning him to lend a hand with the sail. He had to rush away, taking the torch with him. The foreroom was now black without the torch's light, except for a grey patch where the low doorway opened into the night. The outside clamour gradually died away, leaving behind only the creaking of ropes and the sail's dull boom. Alone and unobserved, the youngster ceased his pretence and confronted his affliction head-on. They grappled, chest to chest, as the ash-grey square condensed into a cold light, stretching gradually further towards morning sun and glory. Even as the square glinted in the sun, their struggle yet carried on. Attempting to extricate his mind, the bearer of swords writhed in his fetters with a manic vigour. 3 days of this and I'll lose my sanity, he exclaimed to himself. To miss all the opportunities with him is appalling, but to remain here and obsess over it, I'm bound to go insane if I can't move my body and forget for a bit. Chapter 5. Through which the storm giant blusters. A dark figure hunched against the sunlight, Hjalmar Thickskull strode through the door and began rummaging through crates and boxes in search of extra oars. "You're quite lucky, young one," he observed. "If you were outside, you wouldn't be sitting still. Just because you see the sun through the door doesn't mean the entire sky is sunny. You should see the clouds ahead of us. They're just as black as the face of the weathercock, who must now be put into Kiel harbour. Adding to our misfortune, there's no wind, so the captain has ordered all hands to the oars." Alric, rising to his feet, held out his bound hands. "Here are mine. Cut the knots with your knife." Thickskull turned around, gaping. Why, he didn't mean you." "Isn't it obvious?" the sword-bearer demanded. "Don't I have hands? They're even stronger than a troll's this morning. He surely meant me." He tried to speak nonchalantly, but his fingers were fidgeting. Eventually, both he and Thickskull laughed heartily, and Alric made a frank plea. "Do me this favour, shipmate, so that I can stretch my legs. If he didn't mean me, you could have easily misunderstood. When he fusses, you can explain it to him. It's said that the wolf always ends the disputes of the pig." Eventually, Thickskull stooped down and, grinning, placed his knife against the thongs. "See how great it is to be known as a simpleton?" he remarked. "Just make sure you uphold my reputation by providing excellent service while rowing." With a sigh of relief, the sword-bearer stretched his arms. "Just let me have at it," he breathed, before diving into the air like a fish into the water. Indeed, though the Wind-Raven's decks were bathed in sunlight and the sky was blue, a grey canopy of clouds loomed ahead, like a gateway to another world. The clouds swelled with rain, hanging low over the forest and dunes near the shoreline whilst darkening most of the sea. Here and there, white streaks shone like the bared teeth of monsters. Calm had fallen upon the land and sea, but it was full of ominous warnings. The sail hung lifeless, gasping for breath like a living thing. Alric glanced at the sky and then took hold of his oar, pushing himself to the limits of exhaustion. "If we don't head into the harbour, we'll end up like Thorwald Eriksson, cast ashore with a broken keel," he warned. The fates seemed to take pity on them, and the Wind-Raven's crew found refuge behind a wooded bar that served as a shield against the storm. The helmsman declared that they would take advantage of the temporarily calm weather by setting up camp on land for the night. Ashore, the sword-bearer could barely contain his relief and gratitude. Brand congratulated him with a poke. "I knew the Old One would take care of you," he whispered. "Your luck will continue until we return." "Until we return," Alric repeated as though it were a toast. The battle for survival was about to begin. They barely had time to set up camp in a hollow below a wooded knoll before the tempest hit with full force. The wind howled like a beast, shaking everything in its path. The tent canvas threatened to fly away like a kerchief, with everyone hanging onto it for dear life. They fought for fuel amid swarms of sand and battled to keep the fire alive, straining to hear each other over the deafening roar. It was a struggle between giants and pygmies, a fight for survival that would test their spirits and their will to live. Exhausted yet exhilarated, as if, after a day of swordplay, the band collapsed from eating to sleeping. When lightning ripped through the darkness, revealing a deserted ship floundering in terror on the twisting black water, they merely laughed and burrowed deeper, drifting off to sleep with the thunderous roar of breakers along the shore like a mother's lullaby. The ocean was still thundering when they awoke the following day, and the wind still whipped through the treetops. The leader, his mind on Vinland's fires and fare, cursed peevishly, but the junior members of his group welcomed the delay with open rejoicing. "Here's our chance to explore the land," Brand shouted, shaking out his fiery locks like banners. "Let's seize the opportunity before anyone else does. I'll bet a ring that I can beat anyone to the top of this steep." His companions responded promptly, and although he won his wager, the next boy was only a step behind, and none of the 20 was more than a pace in the rear. Once they reached the summit, they streamed whooping into a grove of oak, pine, and sassafras that they had spotted from the water, lying along the bay shore like a ragged, rich-hued mat. Closer inspection revealed raggedness rather than richness, though the beauty of the colours, where pines spread their evergreen over the wind-swept crests and the oak trees on the slopes had turned yellow, russet, and red without shedding a leaf, remained striking. However, compared with Vinland's trees, the growth was stunted, and there was not enough underbrush to lend it even the wildness of a thicket. Only tangles of rose-briar and berry-bramble where the ridges sank into hollows cupping reed-fringed pools. Perhaps the best that could be said for it was that its endless undulations kept curiosity alive. Passing over them was like surmounting billows. One attained a height only to behold another abyss. After a time, it stirred Alrek to restlessness. When it was proposed that they stop at one of the ponds for a duck hunt, he protested. "Who knows what the next ridge may conceal?" he insisted. "Let's find out first what lies before us." Erland expressed surprise. "What else could we possibly find but the ocean?" He peered around. "This has to be close now. The sand wasteland is expanding so fast." Alrek, already swinging his hatchet to carve through brush, had no response except, "Do as you please. I will not rest until we find a conclusion." Erland raised his eyebrows, but the others caught Alrek's fever and charged behind him with great enthusiasm. Their energy could not endure for long, though, as the terrain gradually worsened. In the next valley, sand had choked up the pond, and bushes desperately fought to exist. Then they vanished, giving way to clumps of wiry grass. The trees became sparse, with deep drifts of sand that formed miniature mountains between them, with the bunches only visible atop the cream-coloured peaks. Njal of Greenland revealed the unpleasant truth. "Observing this landscape, I am not sure it is a wise spot to position a landmark. In 20 more years, likely the entire forest will be buried. Woe to the future explorer who believed our tales about the trees here. Even if we searched, we would never uncover the keel of Thorwald." Alrek was quick to conclude, "Then let us not bother with this task." His unwavering determination had spread to everyone, and they marched forward across the undulating dunes that had morphed into yellow snow banks absent any flora. Eventually they arrived at the last peak and stopped as a single hushed group. They gazed at the shore stretching towards the ever-shifting rough ocean. Both were an almighty, monstrous, dominating force, the beastly lair they were intent on confronting. Northward there was nothing but ocean as far as the eye could see. To the west they gazed upon a vast yellow expanse with sand dunes that sloped down to the point of cape. To the south lay the land that they had journeyed, and beyond it the bay which contained their anchored ship. To the east, unbroken waves and untouched strands of sand stretched out before them. Suddenly a cry broke their silence. "Yonder! Yonder is something washed ashore!" All of them saw it clearly against the sand, a dark, motionless object that the waves had cast aside. So large did it seem against the strange light that some declared it to be a whale, and others thought it might have been an overturned boat. However, the light on the wonder strand is wondrous. As they ran towards the object, previously looming as a large sea creature, it dwindled suddenly from whale or boat size down to that of a human body. Unintentionally they slowed their pace, and a whisper went around, "It is one of the Skraelings, overtaken by the storm." Only Alrek shook his head and pressed on. "That is no animal hide wrapping him," he said. After running a dozen more yards, he arrived at the side of the stark form. He then bent over it. He remained frozen in that position, petrified with astonishment. When the others arrived and looked, they too were speechless. "The huntsman!" they exclaimed. It was the huntsman's colossal frame, sea-drenched and almost destroyed by the waves. His feet were tangled with kelp, and his hair was entwined with starfish. As he had lain upon the rock that winter day, so he lay here upon the sand, flat on his back with his hands clasped over his breast, though now his eyes were closed, and neither sound nor motion came from his blue lips. Doubting their senses, the explorers remained transfixed over the huntsman's body as they scanned the shore up and down. The scene was more yawningly empty than ever before. It seemed as though he had fallen from the sky. Chapter 6. About the strange find on Keel Cape. Gard mused aloud. I would give much to know how he got here and what he was doing in the north of Vinland before setting out to explore the south. Brand quickly added, "And what happened to Hallard and the others he was with?" Even the glib one piped in, "Yes, indeed, we must know what befell his company." But Erlend, tanned and handsome with a face 3 shades darker than his locks, reproached them. "Alrek might think the loyalty of a Greenlander to his people is shallow. In those times, treachery was looked upon with disdain, and 2 of the 3 men became hot with shame. Brand tried to make amends. He knows we care for him as much as anyone. I heard Eric of Bratalid employed the huntsman as his steward, but that was the only friend the huntsman ever had. We'll make sure to bury him regardless." Rubbing his ear practically, Gard commented, "It won't be easy to bury him if we don't carry him far inland. I've heard that sand moves like snow, and if dead bodies aren't buried deep, they tend to come back to life." A few of the men involuntarily made the sign of the cross, and the strong one stood tall and dignified. "I'll carry him to the bay without delay." Alrek cautioned, "Be quiet until we see how heavy he is. Domar, lift his other shoulder." While Domar tried to move the man, Alrek noticed a cord connected to a deerskin bag. Excitement spread through the group as they realized how important the bag might be. To think he carried it even when he was drowning? Alrek, squatting on his heels, pondered the man lying before him. "He's holding the bag too tightly to move it, but we could perhaps pry our fingers into the opening and see what's inside. He's one of your countrymen," he said, glancing around at the Greenlanders who had gathered alongside him. The group looked down at the man, then at each other, before Brand muttered, "If you dare." Alrek sneered. He teased out the cord ends between the man's cold palms and unfastened the knot that sealed the bag's opening. "A chain," he said as they closed upon something within. "What a chain!" he exclaimed as they drew it out from the bag. All of them echoed him. "What a chain!" It gleamed in the sunlight, fashioned from shimmering gold and adorned with rough-cut gems. Its circumference was the same as Alrek's finger, and it unfurled from the bag, coil after coil, until it stretched out to the length of his arm. What a treasure to find in a land inhabited only by savage men! They gathered around, marveling at their find, feasting their eyes upon it. Rainey Thinnose reached out to touch it, offering an apologetic nod towards the still figure on the ground. At once the man's eyelids glided open, and his small, malevolent eyes surveyed them without a word. Rainey snatched back his hand as if he had been bitten. Everyone else recoiled too, with a sharp scream. The eyes focused on them all, and finally a voice, so faint that it resembled a distant cry through the roar of the waves on the shore, whispered, "Are you trying to steal from me?" The group bristled indignantly. "No," they all shouted. "We would never dream of it. We only wanted to look—" "Put it back," the man commanded. Alrek hesitated, his face flushing with anger. But what was the use of arguing with a corpse? He shrugged off his resentment and silently replaced the chain. When the final knot had been fastened, the man's eyes left him and searched the faces of each of the gathered Greenlanders. "Swear!" the weak voice exhorted. As they approached, their fear was palpable, flitting like birds around a predator's grasp. But Erlend spoke with confidence. "We need not pledge against theft." The words were hesitant but clear. "Swear to secrecy, on the edge of your blades." Erlend considered for a moment. "His secret, his call," he said. "Is that not so?" His gaze shifted to the sword-bearer, questioning. No one defied the amiable one's code of honor. Alrek unsheathed his sword and shrugged. They each drew a knife and held it by the blade, carving red grooves into their palms. They lifted their knives and spoke the oath. The huntsman's gaze singled them out, one by one. When he reached the last, little Olaf the Fair, tears streamed down his face, but the others held still. Though they rattled their weapons, panic chilled their bones. The stare was unnatural, the scene desolate, the bleak sky, the naked shore, the breakers' unending thunder from which cries emerged in strained whispers. The hare, the fleet-footed but trembling youth, spoke up. "Let's leave him. He's not alive. A troll hides in him and speaks with his lips. Evil will come of this. Let's leave him." He clutched Alrek's coat nervously. "Come on!" Alrek pulled free. "No! You abandon a comrade. That proves you're a coward." With a calm demeanor, he regained control of his composure once he retrieved his cloak and addressed his comrades. "If we gather some sizable branches and use our cloaks, we can construct a stretcher to transport him to the bay. It appeared to me that you were all eager to keep him alive for intel, yes?" It's doubtful that the group would have gone through the arduous task of lugging their wounded comrade over the sand dunes if it weren't for the anticipation of obtaining significant information, and the sailors were clearly operating with this objective in mind. For them, caring for the huntsman was about as tender a task as polishing a knife or oiling a lock. After he regains enough strength to speak, he should be able to provide us with valuable information. They encouraged one another as they finally left him bundled in hides, before setting about preparing to return to their vessel, with a break in the grey sky now visible to the west. The only notable difference in mindset between the senior members of the group and their juniors was that while the elder group merely harboured a dislike of the huntsman, for the younger men he possessed a frighteningly alluring quality. For them, his eyes appeared as twin demons guarding the entrance to the treasure chest below. It's safe to say that even while they busily focused on going aboard and settling in, they did not forget about the huntsman, as they awaited a more definitive sign of the Storm King's reform. Just before sunset, the break in the clouds expanded. Thrym, the massive giant responsible for cloud herding, moved the unwieldy clouds northward, certainly burdened by their weight. To the west, a jagged bar silhouetted the golden sun, and as the pink-tinged splendor of the sky persisted to the south, the moon peered out of the east. The wind-raven, whooped by a chorus of cheers, shook her bedraggled plumage before gliding over the waves now alight with shimmering silver. The transformation was so welcome that Alrek was able to shake off his malaise, while the seated bystanders revelled noisily in contentment. The opportunity to experience the exceptional beauty of the Wonder Strands has never been better, they cheerfully exclaimed, once again energized by the sight of the curving stretch of glittering sand dunes that emerged before them. Passing that curve was a unique experience, for the bend of the shore made it appear as if a cape was just ahead, yet the cape ever receded as they approached, a flying point that could never be caught. Indeed, it makes the world seem a place of peculiar wonders. Fast the Fat marvelled after sitting for a long time watching it in silent fascination. It makes one curious about everything. If the huntsman would only speak now and tell us what he has seen, this would be a good time to amuse ourselves with a tale. "How do you know he has seen anything?" sneered a harsh voice, harsh for all its faintness, from the pile of skins upon the forecastle. They wheeled eagerly that the ship rocked under them. "Are you ready to tell the tidings you have seen? Will you tell us about— Tell about the South Country, huntsman. Did you see any Skrellings? No? Tell us first how you came here. Yes, your adventure. Yes, yes. We beg of you. Go on, go on." They were all speaking at once now, boys and men, and their covetousness proved their downfall. For the clamour reaching the helmsman on the afterdeck, he descended with exceptional agility and waddled toward them. "If you are going to talk to anyone, you talk to me, your chief," he commanded, "and tell me what you have done with the boat and the men I lent you." The huntsman's manners gained little at the sight of his superior. "I do not see that I have done anything with them," he answered sullenly, "because the boat went to pieces on a sandbar, and Randrew Svipdag and Black Thord down to her. It is seen that I saved you the best man of the three. 4 men were in the boat when you started out on that foolish trip." The helmsman caught him up. "Bjorn's foster son is worth speaking about. What have you done with him?" The blood settled in the huntsman's sunken cheeks as water in a hollow. "Is the boy of so much importance that I must carve his rune on a separate stick?" he snarled. "What else could he be than drowned? Is it likely that Valkyrias came down for him? I think you are a fool. If Freydis, daughter of Eric, had not sought your riches and sent you here to seek more, you would not have had the courage to step onto a ship," barked the helmsman. "And yet you call yourself chief. Think what you will, but know that I will not speak another word to you." With those words, the helmsman threw himself onto his face, consumed by anger and sulking as no man ever had before. Even his officers' threats meant nothing. They may as well have been directed at the ship's mast. Finally, the rotund helmsman had to pause to catch his breath. He stood there, puffing, glaring, and tugging at his belt when his eyes caught sight of Alrek's presence. The sword-bearer felt the gaze and winked at Brand. His apprehension proved correct. The helmsman expelled a snort of air. "You? What are you doing here? Did I not order for you to be locked up for the remainder of the voyage?" Alrek opened one eye in respectful surprise. "Me?" he asked. "Was it not your intention to free me when you ordered everyone to the oars?" The weathercock was so enraged that he performed 3 stamping capers before he found words in his rage. When he did eventually speak, his words were forceful enough to break the buckle off of his belt. "Go back," he bellowed. "Go back and do not dare to come out until I bring you before Karlsefne. If I were your chief, I would hang you." For a rare moment, Alrek's military training vanished under his vexation. As he rose, he scrutinized the portly figure. "You would not have to bother," he replied. "If you were my chief, I would hang myself." Applauding laughter erupted from his comrades as Alrek trailed off, swiftly followed by an outburst from the helmsman. Alrek paid no attention. His heart was too full of resentment. He lay in solitude, undisturbed until a commotion interrupted him. Another group of captives had arrived, Brand with torn clothes and flashing eyes, followed by Olaf with a bleeding nose and unwavering loyalty, Gard the Ugly with a swollen lip, and strong Domar with a purple lump on his forehead. The latter enthusiastically shouted an explanation over the others' heads. "I knocked him down, Alrek, as sure as I stand here. He tried to cuff Brand for laughing at you, and I laid him flat before Lodin could lay hold of me, and he will have to come before Karlsefne with a black eye. Think of it." Alrek seemed to ponder the matter for a moment before responding. "You struck your leader?" The strong one chuckled with glee, and Underscore blacked his eye. "It will be shut tight, I know it will, and he thinks so much about making a fine appearance before the lawman. And maybe his nose will swell also, and—" However, his joviality dissipated when he realized the gravity of Alrek's expression and the fact that he was soldier-bred. "Now I forgot that you are soldier-bred. I suppose that in the Earl's camp they would not call it a jest to knock down a chief," he admitted. The sword-bearer, leaning back on a bale of fur, responded with a dry tone. "They would not be likely to call it anything, for it could not happen there at all." As the final walrus hide knot was tied, the torches left behind a sulky group in darkness. Chapter 7. Concerning Thorfinn Karlsefne, the lawman. That night was twice as long, and the sunrise that replaced it lingered until noon. The day born from that sunrise had no end. It seemed the weathercock had ensnared time with walrus thongs. The banks, glimpsed through the doorway, unwound like endless witches' thread as they travelled on the river lane up to Vinland Bay. Their focus shifted from the landscape to pilfering a fish keg when voices erupted from the deck above. "A boat! Coming from behind that island!" "Who?" "The two in white. Likely thralls. But the man in blue. Karlsefne is known to wear blue. By the hammer, I do believe that's the lawman himself." The forecastle exulted while the foreroom sank into silence. Though they craved arriving at the camp, encountering part of it in midstream startled them. Domar's fervent gasp mirrored the Greenlanders' fears. "Thank the gods Karlsefne isn't my chief. Other men have blue mantles," Alrek offered. "Be still and listen." Crouched on rope coils and fur heaps, they held their breath and strained to eavesdrop on the chaos. The scrambling of deck feet blurred all other sounds. But soon the feet clomped down the ladder, silence followed, and a new voice, deep and warm, spoke. "Greetings, friends. Firstly, tell me, are you all safe and accounted for?" The prisoners' eyes lit up as their mouths spoke in unison. "Karlsefne!" The weathercock's voice barely registered after that joyous reunion. "All safe here, lawman, save for my mishap." He probably rambled on in his usual long-winded fashion, but the 5 listeners in the forward cabin heard nothing more. The throng that had surged forward withdrew noisily, and through the gap the prisoners caught a glimpse of the gunwale, and a tall, muscular figure clad in blue rising next to the rotund helmsman like a tree next to a shrub. The formidable figure had a face of rugged beauty framed by locks of iron grey. Even after the gap had closed, they huddled motionless, staring at the shifting backs and straining their ears for the deep voice until the helmsman's lament clanged through like clattering pottery. "But don't ask me what success we've had, lawman, for I'll tell you right away that the plan you held dear has been ruined beyond repair. Through no fault of my own, but because of your brother's son's bloodthirstiness. Not only did he flout your commands, but he kindled outlawry in the heart of every boy on board who otherwise would obey my—" Brand got up on his bound feet, and no one knows how he did it, and made his way to the door on them. "That's untrue, no matter what you or others say," he exclaimed, and when his leader stopped out of sheer amazement, and everyone turned gawking, he followed his voice out the door. "We are altogether against his will. Obeying him is a disgrace to any man with manhood. Domar gave him a black eye." "Yes, that's correct," Domar bellowed, followed by Gard and little Olaf, as they too worked their way to the door. A sudden lurch of the ship threw them off balance, and they tumbled in a heap almost at Karlsefne's feet. The crew started laughing while the weathercock started accusing, and the rebels began denying. Alrek looked at them and sneered contemptuously, his soldier instincts taking over. That quickly turned into amusement when the clamour stopped abruptly at a single word from the deep voice, and he caught a glimpse of Bran's fiery hair drooping like captured flags. But after a moment he turned and stretched his bound arms over a cask, hiding his face in them.